So, Julian, a slightly different, clean conversation with Caitlin. If I could just reiterate, as this is Caitlin, me with my specialty is clean language and modeling complex systems with clean language and metaphor. And Julian, who does modeling complex systems with art and visual meaning. And we've been talking, so this is certainly not anything that I know a lot about, so it's very much the edges of my thinking. But I've been talking to a few people, and now you this morning, about why what we do creates this kind of magic for people.
Mm-hmm.
When they see their stuff as a system, a picture, a metaphor, when they see complex stuff mapped out, what is it that it does to their system?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know what do you think? What have you discovered lately? I know you've been hanging around with neuroscience, you've been hanging around with social attachment theory, you've been hanging around with clever people. What do you know at the moment about when you make pictures for people?
Well, just a couple of baselines. I think I know people talk about, some people don't agree with the left and right brain, but certainly, who's the guy who does left brain, right brain? Him. There's something about turning words into pictures that I think the visual senses are I think they're right brain, they're holistic, they're big picture, they're somatic. They work, I think, it's just my theory, they work below the level of conscious thought and you get it all at once.
So for you, conscious thought is at one level, and then there's stuff that's below that level?
Verbal cognition, rational thinking. The left brain is very rational and linear and verbal. And yet when you see something all at once, you get an instant gut reaction. There's a lot of data in that gut reaction where it's you scared, you see a shark, you love a picture of a beautiful flower, but it is somatic and affects the nervous system, whether it's fight or flight or rest and digest kind of thing. And if I was doing, for example, doing a coaching picture for you, listening and eliciting your metaphors of some situation, if I draw those and you see that, it's a synoptic all at once. If it's a reasonably, I'm not saying whether it's a beautiful picture, but it's a meaningful picture. And I think when you see what you've said in a non-verbal form, it has a different impact.
Mm-hmm.
It has a different kind of neurological impact. And certainly I've seen when I make a big thing of it now with clients, if I'm doing a picture, whether it's individual or organizational, I'll go and show them the first draft. The first time they see it, I'm in the room with them. It's printed very large and it's on the wall. So it's a very bodily experience. And they go, and they're exploring it and looking at it and laughing. Say a client from the police said recently, it's nice to see everything in my mind all at once. All the stuff I hold in my head is out there on the paper. So it's quite an efficient, quick way of visual knowledge, really.
And there's something in the process that's also about distilling out noise from signal.
Right.
Because you can't draw everything.
Can I jump straight in then? So, I've just made this model up instantly. When I'm listening, I'm not saying I'm getting the right data. I'm just sifting and distilling what resonates in me from the meaning of your words. So you might be telling me something and it's a bit abstract and I'm like not interested. But when you go, yeah, but then that happened and I felt like that, I write that down because that's got emotional resonance. It sounds really important to you when you say those things, and those things I can't draw, or they're peripheral to. I'm just trying to get at what is really you want. What's your problem? What do you want? So it's in language, really. And again, it's not right. It's just the way I do it. It works enough so that it's reasonably successful. Yeah. Oh yes, that's what I said.
So one of the ways that you do this you run it through your own body for emotional resonance. And I know I don't do that. But I'm still deleting. So I carry a certain amount of data until I see it line up, coalesce. And then I delete all of that, and it's just what's left is the structure. So it's much simpler. Or another way of looking at it, it's I'm always listening for what's the fractal, of which all of these are examples of this pattern over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for the pattern generating structure.
So in the same way, I might be listening to something, and it might be something you've experienced once, or it's just a one-off. But if you're continuous being somebody's bullying you, and it's a pattern, a strong pattern, I could possibly hear that you've been putting up with this for a year, a week. You know, it's a regular repeating pattern that's strong enough to come through in the tone of your voice and your body gesture.
Yeah, well, if I think about when we did our writing retreat in Belfast, I was talking about a very, very specific problem at work. And so I was describing a problem at work, and you were drawing it for me. But what was really interesting was you did listen for the conversational metaphors. It's like I'm trying to hold two worlds together when those worlds want to, when they can't actually be in the same space. So it's like I've got a fissure in the world between my values, my experience, and this desire to hold everything together. And you drew it, it was like the world had a huge fissure in it, and I had my foot on either side, and I'm trying to hold two kinds of people together. Well, it wasn't like people then, it was two concepts is what it was like, in order that something else could be protected. And it was really interesting because you drew it for me, and I was very much talking about work. But when I went away and you sent me the drawing, it was 100% obvious to me that this was me at 6 trying to keep my parents together. Mm-hmm. And actually being so intent on trying to be inclusive, trying to understand them, trying to keep in a good relationship with them, that I was unable to process what I thought.
And on a different situation you've told me about, which is you struggled so hard with this bind that 2 other clients were in. You said a question like, you really like you were so at the end of your that you said something like, it must be something about me is the reason I can't solve their problem.
Yes. Yeah. What I think I remember. Yes. Yeah. So I'm like, what is it in me that means, it was 2 things. It was that I keep getting these clients over and over again, because that's one of the things that we do, a little bit like therapists have to. We look at the quality of the clients we get and we go, okay, what is it I have to learn now? Or what is it I'm projecting onto the world? But that thing of the simplification of you drawing my experience allowed my system, in my wider system, to resonate with going, here's another example of that thing that I can see in the picture. Here's another example of it in my life. Here's another example of it in my life. Here's another example of it in my life. It was distilled, in my words, to a fractal, so finely distilled that I could see how I was generating it all over the place, and then being able to recognize myself without judgment. I think that's what's really important when you draw problems. The way that you draw them, it's not just that people can talk about them, it's that I can be with it without being judged by it or judging myself by it. So I could see it and go, okay, so if I wasn't doing that, if I wasn't 6, if I wasn't trying to hold this together, what do I think and what do I want? Well, the truth was, I wanted out. I did not want to be in this relationship anymore. They could do whatever they liked, but I didn't want to be in this relationship. And I think it took me to be outside of the metaphor to have a new thought or feeling about it.
Well, I mean, may I suggest that maybe what was, from your question, what is it in me that I can't solve this? I ended up drawing on the paper what was in you, and it was outside of you, so you could go, ah. So it went from subject to object in Keegan's term.
Yes, and the thing about this inspiring capability was like, then I could do something different. And it reminds me, I've been having a few conversations with a woman called Kerry Turner, who looks at complex systems mapping. And she speaks really eloquently about how at the moment she's particularly focused on young people, is that if they understand the system within which they operate, so she's asking them, essentially an ideal neighborhood for you would be like what? And when they map out how neighborhoods work, then they're inspired to see what they could do to contribute to it. But when they're at the effect of their neighborhood's structure, they're not capable to do anything, and it breeds passivity. So when I was in the problem, I was just going around it. I was held by the bind. But when it was mapped out for me, I could do something different. I had more choice.
Well, you can't see the structures. I mean, those children might not be able to imagine what those structures are, but when they're out there, you can go, oh, okay, we've got, lack of funding, this and that, all these different things affecting. It extends your cognition to things that aren't in the here and now and aren't verbal.
Yes, but they are in the, again, this comes back to that David saying, I'm interested in what's here, but it's not here, that for what is here to make sense. It's like they can then make sense of what is here. It's like when I see your drawing of my experience, I'm like, well, of course it feels like that. It was like I didn't have to keep analyzing it. I could go, oh yeah, it makes sense now.
There you go. So just going back to the very first question, you said analyze and analyze it. I'd suggest that's going on in your cognition.
Yeah.
And when it's out there, you go, it's a aha. You see it all at once, and
a sort of gestalt.
It's a gestalt. You can literally see the visual structure of the gestalt of your problem in its entirety and non-linearity.
And so one of the things that you and I are going to go on to do is, we often collaborate on things, but I think that after having had that experience with you and thinking, my goodness, if I'd done that a year earlier, how much potentially less time would I have wasted in the system, not understanding the system, but being in it. So I'm thinking that when I first go and talk to clients when they've got complex, wicked problems, if we could go in together, when I'm asking the clean questions, which, because I'm modeling in the moment and building it, I can build it. You can draw it. We can, record the meeting and then go back over it. What are you noticing? What am I noticing? And come back to them, not with a proposal for what we should do, but just this is what's going on so far.
Yeah, and actually, what that's really interesting, because something I've been thinking about a lot. When people talk about systems and wicked problems, it's very real, and often people will talk about the content of the wicked problem. But what I want to listen to, and maybe a second round of that kind of piece of work, for me, it's the very dense, entangled relational dynamics and entanglements that we can't see, that cause that bind, that we don't even know that we've got a bind, like you had with your Fisher picture. But that's the underlying foundation before we even look at the content of the wicked problem.
Yes. So in the picture, I was trying to analyze, I was here trying to analyze this, I was here trying to analyze this, I was here trying to keep this. But when I can see the whole thing, you're like, oh, now I can make a choice. And I think, yes, but it wasn't, I think what was actually really, really important to me was that you had no vested interest. And I think that that's where the joy of an external consultant comes from, is especially a modeler. You weren't trying to sell me anything. You weren't trying to, and I think that that's what we could do really well for clients at that very initial outset, before you start investing a load of money into change processes. Let's just go, what do you, because what I can do with systemic modeling is create a small world network. Give me 6 of your people. I could help you model and go, what do you know right now is going on? And if we can then draw that to go, okay, it's never likely to be what you think. The solution is never likely to be from where you are now, because you're still in the problem. But if you model it out, then from there you can make a much more informed choice of, oh, okay, well, if that's what's going on, what would we like to have happen?
And that reminds us kind of work I do as well. You know, you can help a group of people kind of work out a strategy and, you know, all the content of their wicked problem. But actually, what's staring them in their face or is at the end of their noses is their collaboration culture of how they talk about the strategy is really the foundational problem you've got to look at first. That's why nobody wants to do culture, because it's going to be, they've got to do something differently.
Yeah, and that's where in clean scoping or systemic modeling, I'm always going, what I'm always looking for is the congruence or incongruence between what you'd like to have happen and what you're doing right now in this moment, the way you're engaging with one another, engaging with me, talking about one another. And that's where the clean coding that we train in systemic modeling, that's where that's so important, is because it's the revealing the structure of the collaboration dynamic in this moment.
Yep, yeah.
If you can catch it now, we don't have to do a whole load of stuff. We can just do it right now.
And there's another bit to that goes down to like something like Dave Snowden says a lot. He says you can't change the behaviors, you can't change other people's behaviors apart from not being ethical. You can't. But what you can do is change the interactions.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing, is changing the interactions. So we're doing something differently, and we're not forcing them to do anything differently, but through this kind of work, and they can see the picture and the clean systemic modeling.
Okay, so let's go do some experimenting.
Yep.
Together, see what we produce. I'm quite happy. I'm far enough away from that issue now that I'm quite happy to use that picture that you drew for me. So let's maybe get together, have another clean conversation in a couple of weeks and use that picture.
Yeah, and I might like to paint a bit to make it a little bit easier for people to see on screen.
Paint my picture, paint away, Julian. There's nothing. What's more enjoyable than having an artist paint your inner soul?
Nice watercolors, you know.
Absolutely.
Soft colors. Brilliant.
Brilliant. Thanks for this.
My pleasure. See you soon.